Carl Jung documented a psychological pattern so disturbing that he called it among the most challenging transformations he had witnessed in human nature. Across multiple cases, he observed patients, especially empaths, who seemed gentle and broken until something inside them snapped. What Jung discovered changed everything we thought we knew about empaths. These weren't victims having breakdowns, they were psychological geniuses having breakthroughs. Jung's case files from his Zurich clinic reveal a disturbing pattern. Patient after patient arrived, carrying the same wounds, empaths who had been systematically destroyed by those who claimed to love them. They came with bruises they explained away, depression they blamed on themselves, and a universal tendency to apologize for existing. These individuals had spent their lives absorbing everyone else's pain: alcoholic parents' rage, spouses' infidelity, and family members' dysfunction. They were emotional shock absorbers for their entire social systems. But here's what made Jung's blood run cold. These empaths hadn't just endured abuse, they had been studying it. When Jung asked them to describe their relationships, he expected scattered thoughts from damaged minds. Instead, he discovered something that changed everything. These patients had kept detailed mental records of every person who had ever hurt them. They knew their abusers' triggers, insecurities, and deepest fears. They had mapped emotional patterns with surgical precision. They had never used this knowledge, not once, until something pushed them past their breaking point. Jung realized he wasn't treating victims. He was sitting across from psychological geniuses in hiding. Their genius wasn't in creation, it was in emotional archaeology. They could excavate people's deepest wounds just by watching their micro-expressions. Jung began testing their abilities. He brought in colleagues without telling these patients anything about them. Within minutes, they could identify childhood traumas, relationship patterns, and professional insecurities. Their accuracy rate was consistently above 95%. These empaths weren't psychic. They were paying attention at a level most humans never reach. What others called intuition, they called data collection. Society had taught these individuals that this gift was a curse. Every time they tried to voice what they saw, the lies, the manipulation, the hidden agendas, people called them too sensitive or overly emotional. They learned to silence themselves, to doubt their perceptions, and to apologize for seeing what others couldn't. But the truth doesn't disappear just because you stop speaking it. It accumulates, and in these cases, it had been accumulating for decades. Jung identified a consistent pattern across his case studies. Their transformation didn't happen gradually. It happened in one explosive moment. The trigger was always betrayal. Not just any betrayal, but betrayal by someone the empath had completely trusted and protected. In case after case, Jung documented the same scenario. The empath would discover infidelity, financial betrayal, or emotional manipulation from their closest person. What made it devastating wasn't the act itself, it was realizing they had seen the signs all along and ignored them. These patients did what empaths do. They said nothing. They absorbed the pain in silence. They blamed themselves. They tried harder to be perfect partners, children, or friends. Then came the moment that changed everything, what Jung called the clarity event. Most people would expect empaths to cry, to scream, to fall apart. Their abusers expected that too. They were prepared for emotional chaos. What happened instead terrified everyone involved. The empaths became unnaturally calm. Jung observed what he described as the most chilling psychological transformation possible. These empaths didn't attack. They didn't rage. They began to speak the truth. They revealed everything they had observed, catalogued, and silently endured. Not with cruelty, with clinical precision. Like surgeons identifying each diseased organ before removing it. This wasn't revenge. It was clarity. These empaths were finally using their gift of complete perception not to excuse behavior, but to expose it. Jung realized this pattern wasn't revenge. It was shadow integration. The moment when someone stops denying the parts of themselves they were taught to hide. The empath's shadow wasn't evil, it was their suppressed intelligence, their silenced intuition, and their denied strength. When they finally integrated these aspects, they became psychologically complete. Here's what made these cases so disturbing for Jung. The transformation was permanent. These patients didn't cycle back into people-pleasing. They didn't apologize for their newfound boundaries. They didn't second-guess their perceptions anymore. They had become empaths who could no longer be manipulated. Jung documented how these individuals' entire lives transformed within months. They left abusive relationships with strategic precision. They cut contact with toxic family members without emotional drama. They rebuilt their lives on their terms. They became what Jung called selectively empathetic, still deeply caring but strategically protective of where that care flowed. The most disturbing part was how these transformed empaths' presence affected others. People who had once walked all over them suddenly felt nervous around them. These empaths weren't aggressive or cruel, but everyone sensed something had fundamentally changed. Manipulative people can sense when their usual tactics won't work. They avoid integrated empaths like vampires avoid sunlight. As Jung wrote, "The awakened empath doesn't need to announce their power. Others can feel it in their bones." Jung spent years following these transformed patients' post-integration lives. What he discovered kept him awake at night. These individuals had become extraordinarily successful. Their businesses thrived because they could read clients' real needs before they voiced them. Their new relationships were healthy because they could identify emotional predators within minutes. Their decisions were flawless because they trusted their intuitive intelligence completely. Jung realized something that made his blood run cold. These empaths hadn't become less empathetic. They had become perfectly empathetic, which meant they were also perfectly strategic. They could manipulate others as easily as they had once been manipulated. They understood human psychology at a level that made them nearly omnipotent in social situations. Here's what truly terrified Jung. These transformed empaths chose not to use this power destructively. They could have destroyed every person who had ever hurt them. Instead, they simply removed toxic people from their lives and moved on. Jung had witnessed the birth of the integrated empath, someone with both the sensitivity to feel everything and the wisdom to choose what deserved their energy. These empath transformations didn't happen in isolation. Jung documented how their changes affected every system they had been part of. Family dynamics collapsed not because these individuals destroyed them, but because they stopped enabling dysfunction. Alcoholic family members were forced to face their addictions without empaths as emotional dumping grounds. Manipulative siblings could no longer use these transformed empaths as psychological punching bags. Jung observed what he called the empath's mirror effect. These transformed individuals didn't have to actively confront people's dysfunction anymore. Their mere presence reflected issues with uncomfortable clarity. Manipulators couldn't stand to be around them. They felt exposed, seen through, and unable to operate their usual psychological games. Meanwhile, authentic people felt safe with these empaths for the first time. The most disturbing discovery came when Jung introduced these transformed patients to others in his practice. Within minutes, they could identify core psychological wounds and the exact type of therapy needed. Jung realized these empaths' diagnostic accuracy surpassed his decades of training. This created an ethical dilemma that haunted him for years. If empaths could develop this level of psychological insight, what did that mean for the future of psychology itself? Jung began quietly studying other empaths in his practice, developing what he called the Integration Observation Protocol, a framework for understanding how this transformation occurs naturally. Jung identified consistent stages across his cases. First, recognition. Empaths learn to identify their suppressed shadow aspects, not just their anger, but their intelligence, their strength, and their right to boundaries. They stopped pathologizing their perceptions and started trusting their emotional intelligence as the sophisticated data processing system it was. Second, integration. Jung watched empaths merge their light and shadow aspects into what he termed the complete self. They became people who could be incredibly kind to those who deserved it, and ruthlessly precise with those who didn't. Third, application. Integrated empaths learn to use their emotional intelligence strategically, not just defensively. They became psychological architects, people who could read, influence, and navigate human systems with supernatural precision. These transformed empaths could no longer be victimized because they saw manipulation coming from miles away and neutralized it before it could take root. The process's final stage was what Jung understood as the natural return to service. Integrated empaths didn't become cold or disconnected. They became selectively generous with their gifts. They used their abilities to help other empaths transform, creating what Jung documented as a network of psychologically resilient individuals. Jung realized that empaths weren't mentally ill. They were evolutionarily advanced individuals, living in systems designed to exploit their gifts. He began seeing empathic sensitivity not as a disorder to be cured, but as a psychological capability to be properly understood and protected. Jung's final notes on these cases reveal something beautiful. These individuals lived the rest of their lives as what he called balanced warriors, people capable of incredible gentleness with those who earned it and implacable strength against those who threatened it. They became templates for what Jung believed was humanity's next evolutionary step. People who could feel everything without being destroyed by it, see everything without becoming cynical, and love deeply without losing themselves. Jung's last observation about these transformed empaths, written near the end of his career, they proved that the empath's journey is not from sensitivity to numbness, but from unconscious absorption to conscious choice. They became not less empathetic, but perfectly empathetic. Modern research confirms what Jung's cases demonstrated. Empaths who undergo shadow integration become psychologically invincible. They can no longer be gaslighted because they trust their perceptions. They can't be manipulated because they see emotional games before they're fully formed. They can't be broken because they've already been to the bottom and emerged stronger. Every empath will face their transformation moment. The betrayal so profound, it forces them to choose between remaining a victim or becoming sovereign. The question isn't whether the empath will snap, it's whether they'll integrate their shadow consciously or let it consume them destructively. Jung's research revealed that most empaths, when pushed to their breaking point, choose integration. They don't become cruel, they become precise. They don't lose their hearts, they gain backbones. The transformed empath becomes what Jung called love with boundaries, someone who can care deeply while protecting themselves. Jung's final insight about these cases still resonates through psychology circles today. These individuals didn't become different people, they became who they always were beneath the conditioning. Every empath carries within them the potential to become psychologically untouchable. It just takes the right catalyst, usually betrayal, to force that transformation. As Jung wrote, the empath's greatest tragedy isn't their sensitivity, it's how long they wait to honor it properly. Jung's research revealed something that still makes psychologists uncomfortable. Empaths aren't naturally victims, they're naturally powerful. Society just teaches them to suppress that power in the name of being acceptable. When empaths finally snap, they're not breaking. They're awakening to abilities they possessed all along. The most beautiful part of Jung's findings? These transformed empaths never lost their capacity for love. They just learned to love themselves as fiercely as they once loved others. Your sensitivity isn't your weakness, it's your weapon. And the day you learn to wield it consciously is the day you become truly powerful. Not dangerous to innocent people, but dangerous to those who would exploit your gifts. The world doesn't need more broken empaths. It needs more awakened ones. And Jung's research proves that transformation is not only possible, it's inevitable. The empath will snap. The only question is, will you direct that power, or will it direct you?